Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. Welcome to Lee and Lee. Could you tell which one was which one? We are talking to a man and a woman who are married, both of them Lee Cordell, and together they are the CEO, founder, and executive assistant, respectively, of the Institute for Trauma and Psychological Safety. Together, they help educate and inspire others to develop safer, healthier, more mutually beneficial relationships, both personally and professionally. Welcome, and I have a whole lot more to say, but let me just start with welcome.
Thank you.
So Lee and I know one another because we've been in a juicy mastermind together, and I've actually always kind of wanted to have a personal conversation with you. So when you have a podcast, that's one of the ways to make it happen. And maybe will you, in big strokes, say a little bit about your journey professionally, personally? Like, you have such serious academic training and have learned to follow intuition and make it your contribution. Will you share a bit about that, Lee?
Sure. I think you meant me, Lee the girl.
Yes, that's correct. I knew we understood, and anyone listening would hear the voice.
Yes. So that's actually one of the ways we can tell when people are talking to us differently is they use different intonations. It's very fascinating. So I am a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner by trade, spent a really long time in, the most intense settings you can find in a hospital as an acute care NP, and really realized that a lot of that was coming from my own trauma and feeling really great in spaces that gave a lot of adrenaline, because then I didn't have to focus in on my own anxieties. And I got exposed to trauma-informed care in the last year of my doctorate, and it just totally blew my mind open. I was like, first of all, why aren't we talking about this in academia, in nursing, and healthcare in general? This needs to be a much bigger part of the conversation in how we understand how people's pasts affect them. And also, just from a personal perspective, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much of what I've personally been going through that I didn't know was a thing. And so that really led me on a internal journey of just a lot of healing, a lot of trauma resurfacing and recovering from that. And on a professional journey of, okay, if I can feel this much better when 3 years ago, I didn't even know this stuff existed, and I was just kind of trying to make it through the day, what could healthcare and academia and corporate and our education, K through 12 systems, like, what could those look like if we started bringing this knowledge to more of a general population level, just where everyone got to know this? And so that's really where the Institute was born out of. And I guess I'll let you tell your part of how you ended up in there.
Yeah. I mean, I started off my undergrads actually in history and psychology. Went and worked for a bank for a little bit, and then ended up for a while she was finishing up school and getting her doctorate and everything. I stayed home, actually was a stay-at-home husband, and took care of the kids and everything like that. And then when she finished, I went back and worked for a historical museum for quite a while. And so now actually I stopped working there to then start here at the Institute. And I will say too, it is one of those things when she first started talking about it, I'm like, oh, I know, with a little bit of a psychology background, I thought, oh, I knew something about trauma, only to kind of realize once you really started digging in, like, oh, there's way more to this, and stuff made a lot more sense. It was something, I really wanted to become a part of, and realizing the work that gets done, and really good.
I have so many questions from that, but let me start with Lee. I'm having fun. All of you listening, you'll know who I'm speaking to based on who responds, but to be able to do it's sort of like a fun game to see if I'm successfully communicating the person I want to ask the question to. So you just described that as a pretty smooth transition, like, oh, I was staying at home and then I thought, yes, I'll get involved. But it's a really big deal to choose to be in a supportive role in your spouse's company. And just the fact of our society is it's an especially intricate step for a man to take in his wife's company. Do I think it should be more intricate and potentially complicated than a woman stepping into a supportive role in her husband's company? Of course not. But is it that way? Yeah, it is. So will you talk a little bit about that, Mr. Lee?
I will say, especially at the beginning, definitely a lot of flack. I mean, from family, friends, and one thing I will say is when I worked at Chase Bank, it was one of those I had assumed beforehand, all I need is a good 8 to 5, provide, money, that kind of thing. That's what a father is supposed to be. That's what a father's supposed to do. And really working there, it got to the point where like the work that I was doing, it was very like, I don't know how to, traumatizing in a lot lot of ways.
Will you be specific? Because that's one of the other things so I want. We use the word trauma, I think, super casually. So what does that mean working at the bank was traumatizing? Yeah.
So when I worked there, what I mostly did is I worked doing like analytics and risk management. And it was right around the time that the housing bubble had kind of crashed. And so it was talking to a lot of people who, while I could reasonably, recognize, okay, it's just business or it's just finance. That's how it works. I'm not the one who made them lose their job, but it's talking to people on a daily basis, like trying to help them keep their house, but also realizing, looking at their financial situation and hearing people crying and hearing people being, extremely upset and pretty much having to tell them like, looking at your situation, you may want to think of moving or, like pretty much telling people like you're going to lose your house because, you have a $5,000 a month payment and you're only bringing in $6,000 a month. Like you can't live on that, and trying to explain it to them. And it was one of those in my head, I kept going to, oh, it's just business. It's not me being the one doing it, but I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that the decisions that I was making were essentially good for business, but we're taking people's homes. And I started feeling kind of like the Grim Reaper, if you will. Like when I would call, it would be like just people so sad, and recognizing like a lot of cases there wasn't anything I could do. So that kind of built up. But I had this feeling that no, I need to provide. I need to do this. I need to stick it out. And, it really kind of, caused me to become definitely more depressed. Had, some serious issues around that. And really, Lee was instrumental in a lot of ways. I was at work one day and just at lunch, just really upset. And she's like, quit. And I'm like, whoa. Like, I can't just quit. She's like, no, like it makes more sense because she could work as an RN. And at that time, I mean, realistically, money-wise, it was like we didn't need the money to survive. And I was able to stay home. She was able to help me, like, I guess, kind of nurse me, if you pardon the pun, and was able to kind of get back to a good mental state. And really the weird thing is like, I really started to enjoy it, being able to take care of the kids, being able to spend that kind of time with them, especially as they were growing. It's one of those things. No, I will say from family and friends, everybody, oh, wait, you're not working? Well, why not? What's wrong? Like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you doing this? And even in some ways being like, like the old lady's like, hey, good job, taking care of your kids today, or way to babysit. And, so there was some of that pushback. But in a lot of ways, too, some of my closest friends understood, my situation. Once I really kind of explained it to like my parents and family, there was still, people would always ask, so when are you going back to work? When, what's going on? And so there was a little bit of that difficulty, especially at first, but realizing too, like the benefit of being able to know my kids, be that close to my kids, and really get to enjoy them and, have fun and seeing them getting bigger. It was 10 times worth it. So.
It's beautiful how you say that. And I love experiencing how uncomplicated it is. Like, yeah, you're clear it's complicated for other people, but there's not a shred of it being complicated for you. It's beautiful. And the thing that actually has my attention is, okay, you were depressed in this, like being the messenger job. Mm-hmm. You quit. Your incredible woman is an RN, an NP, a registered nurse and a nurse practitioner. She nurses you back to vitality, I assume, helping you get over the depression. I happen to know, because of our experience in the mastermind, Mrs. Lee and I, Dr. Lee and I, that you have a lot of erotic chemistry and a hot marriage, which maybe we'll talk about, maybe we won't. But let me just say that's a fact. You both agree?
Yeah. It's true.
I would agree.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to know how that's the reality for you. And Lee, you were nursing Lee. This is a question for either one of you. I'm not directing it to one of you, because in my experience, when one person is in more of a caretaking, nurturing, essentially a parental role, and the other person is receiving, being taken care of in more of a child role, that just zaps the erotic chemistry. Unless, I suppose, if it's a role play, but you're not describing it like that.
No.
You're describing like that you really were nurturing your husband. Talk to me about that and having it be sexy.
Yeah. So I'll say that was probably one of the most unsexy times of our marriage. I mean, I will say this. The one thing he and I have really never had a problem with is sexual chemistry, even during hard times. So when I say like, oh, that was probably the unsexiest time, we were still probably having sex like at least once a week. I mean, that was just, it's a way that we connect. And, that was survival mode time for us, honestly. So I think that the work that he's done over the last several years, first of all, just like his willingness to go there and do the work, that's incredibly sexy.
Totally.
Like, he's like, I feel like, can I cuss on here? I don't know.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
We are. Sometimes it's a G show, but we're in the explicit category. So
yeah,
go for
okay,
it.
Cool. He's like, I feel like shit. And also I'm going to go find a therapist. Like, I'm trying to figure out meds. I'm trying to do what I know is good for me and also good for you, because I do really want to provide. And so I think that energy's always been there. And I think that one of the things that's really like, I guess, taken the notch up from a heat perspective just over the last couple of years is we're starting to get out of that survival mode, right? So we're starting to get to the point where I'm not working 80-hour weeks. He's not doing all the childcare and all the dishes and all the laundry. And we're not, we're not only spending a couple hours on a few days a week together. It's really, we're getting to spend a lot more time together. We're deepening into the fact that we really do. We not only like each other, like love each other, we like each other. And so, I think that's even through me kind of taking care of him. And there's been times he's taken care of me too. I don't want to make it seem like that hasn't happened. Last year I made that transition from nursing to the Institute sound really smooth. There was like a dark month of the soul, not a night of the soul, where I was really not okay. And he really took care of me as well. And I think that we both approach it from a much better boundaried space.
Say more about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that when we first got together, we were pretty codependent. So we were, your feelings are my feelings and my feelings are your feelings. And I'm in charge of your feelings and you're in charge of mine. And in the last few years, because we've been together for 17 years, the last, I would say 2 to 3, we've really been working on, okay, you're allowed to have your feelings and I'm allowed to have mine. And we don't have to try to control each other's. And for both of us, it's safe to have whatever feelings we're having. And that alone has been huge. And also our ability to look at our own capacity. And so like, if he's having a rough day and I just coached people for 10 hours, my capacity might not be, I can sit here for an hour and listen to you vent. That might not work for me. And now he's got other places and spaces he can go to get his support, while also knowing that when I have the capacity, like I will be there for him.
Yeah, actually, the way my husband and I navigate that is when there's that kind of a day, we'll say, what's your bandwidth? And who's like 0 to 10, and whoever is lower, they get to go first.
Nice.
But the person who's at a 6, which still may be higher, or at a 4, and it still may be higher, they can be generous because they know their turn is coming.
I like that. Yeah. There's one of the things we've realized, because, with the pandemic, I quit my job. So I was home. He was home. Kids are home because we have 3 kids. I've realized that I need a lot of personal space and a lot more alone time than I ever knew before that. I think I just had a lot working at the hospital. I had a solitary role. I wasn't on a team. I was there at night. I had my own office. And so that's been a big piece of our intimacy as well, is making sure that I have enough separateness, because if we're together too much, I'm like, I don't want you right now. And that's not the message I want to be sending to him. And so we've found some just nuances in like both of our needs over the last few years that I think have been really, really helpful, because now when I say I need some space, he's not going, oh my goodness, what did I do wrong? Is there something? He's like, oh, she's been home with all of us all day and it's really loud and she needs her like hour of quiet.
Well, and even when you first started, like a little bit pre-pandemic, it was one of those, I was working at the museum, I'd be there throughout the morning. And so especially when the kids were in school, it's one of those I don't think we quite realized at the time. But it's like if they're gone, 8 a.m. to 3 and I'm, I wouldn't come home till like 4:30. It was like during that time, even if you were working, the house was quiet, stuff was generally calm. And like that's the thing with the pandemic. I was able to work some doing like restoration work and stuff like that, like where I didn't have to see visitors or that sort of thing. But once the pandemic really kind of hit the museum hard. So it was one of those, especially the summer, like last year, it was one of those, come summertime, it was like, okay, there's not really that much work. I mean, maybe once, twice, 1-2 days a week. And that's when we started really not like butting heads, but like realizing, okay, we need to figure something out.
How did you do that? Because that, like in the context of a collaborative marriage, really getting comfortable with somebody just needing space, that's a really big pivot. What were some of the, like, can you go back in slow motion, Lee, on like, what was, Mr. Lee, what was your growth path like to now be so comfortable and realize it's not a rejection of you?
Yeah. And I will say, if I'm being honest, it took me a little bit too, because like I was saying, where we didn't really realize, the alone part, when I would come home too, when I was at the museum, I had people there who were like, when I would want to talk about ancient Greco-Roman history, which is like, especially there were people there who would be so super excited to hear about like, oh, this new artifact or this new thing, this new part of research. And when I would come home and I didn't have those people, like be talking to on a daily basis, be like, hey, check out, I found that they unearthed this new ruins in, near Carthage. And I would be talking and recognizing, well, she would in some ways, and I don't mean this meanly, but like humor me a little bit, I kind of started realizing a little bit like, wait, she's not really that interested in this. And it did take me a little bit, because my interests are like are very varied, like really into chemistry or astrophysics. And one of them, I'm like, okay, I know space is not her thing. No. Okay. Like, let's not talk about that.
And also like, how can she love you if she's not interested in the things you're interested in?
Yes.
Exactly. And I saw that as like, oh, you don't want to spend time with me. And there was a little bit of like trying to figure out, okay, what is a good way, in terms of like feeling close. And some of it too has been learning more about trauma and realizing where some of the ideas that I had, because growing up, my family had virtually no boundaries. It was like, if you love somebody then you would be there for them no matter like all the time, whatever they needed.
No fighting.
I mean, I had even just somewhat recently recognized this. I had grandparents who had been divorced, and I heard about the divorce and I was like, oh, it was like years long. It was really acrimonious. They would come to every little holiday, like, Memorial Day, Labor Day, like every little thing. They would always sit there and there was never any fighting. There was never disagreements. Nobody ever stormed off. And just recognizing like, oh, that might not be normal. Like that may not be the way in which it's best to always show love. The boundaries can be okay. And then too, from like recognizing that the idea like, oh, she needs a little bit of space. And I started kind of like trying to find more like hobbies and stuff like that. I built a woodworking shed. And so that was, one of those things, because I realized like, especially at night, I would need something, at least in the beginning, to kind of more distract myself, if you will. But the more and more I've realized, the more and more I've learned is like, no, like that doesn't reflect on me. Like, I think I took the Catholic marriage vows, if you will, like two people become only one person, and I took that as like, oh, we should complete each other 100% all the time kind of thing. And realizing like, oh, but that's not even what that means, much less like, that's not what she needs. That's not even what I need, and realizing like, it's okay to have other outlets. It's okay to be your own person. And then when you said before, like, no, choosing that we want to be together, that we like each other, that it's not just the only reason we're here is not just because we're married and because we can't leave, and it's like, at first that was a little scary, like, oh, well, if that's not there, then it's like, no, then recognizing, no, it's because it's a choice. It always has been a choice, but didn't always necessarily feel like a choice, I guess.
Were you going to comment on that phenomenon and journey too? Yeah,
we had a moment. We had a bad, I don't want to call it a bad moment. It was actually a great moment. It didn't feel good. It was not a feel good moment. Oh, goodness, like maybe 8-9 months ago. I don't know, somewhere in the last several months, where I remember we were having this argument and he said something about the two become one. And I was like, that's not what that means. And it was a really big moment for both of us because we both have disorganized attachments. So whenever I'm in like my avoidant stage, he's in his anxious stage. And whenever then he flips to avoidant, I go into anxious. Or I should say we used to do that. We've been practicing a lot. And I say practicing because it is something you have to actively work on. And what we realized, again, it came back to that boundary and that codependency piece of, we are allowed to be separate people, that just because we're married, like that doesn't mean that we are not choosing to be together every day, like he said. And so it was a really hard moment. And it was also a really beautiful moment because it changed our marriage into an active choice every day instead of this is just how it is. Like we're together because we got married.
Committed forever.
Yes.
Like you signed a contract and now here we go.
Exactly.
So is it worthwhile to ask you, okay, to become one, how do you understand that?
Ooh, I think for me now, I think of it as, we actually joke that we're like each other's lobsters, right? So I don't know if you ever watched Friends, but like Ross and Rachel, he calls her his lobster. And for me, that means like we are together till the end in whatever way, shape, and form is mutually beneficial for us. Like I really see like he's my best friend. And that, this might sound weird, but like that part of our relationship is really it feels the most important to me out of the whole thing. Because, the thing is like a lot of things could happen where that sexual piece could become something we're not, isn't able to occur, or there is an injury or something. And for me, it's just like, no, this is he's my best friend. So we have committed to doing life together in a way that's mutually beneficial for us, whatever that looks like moving forward. For me, it's almost even just taking the marriage piece out of it, because before that, relying on the fact that we were married and there was a contract, like that made me lazy. Because it was like, well, no matter how bad it gets, we're still going to be married. And instead of thinking like, no, how can I wake up and choose this every day? And how can I do it in a way that feels really good for me and feels really good for him? Like that shift, I feel like has helped me become a much better partner. And you could speak to that more than I could, but that really made a difference of like, yeah, we're a unit and we're not one person.
Yeah. I think, that being the big thing is like realizing, at least to me, and, is that, yes, we are two separate people, but together we can be bigger or do more. That we can be more than just two people.
Oh, it's like symbiotic.
Yeah.
I like that.
Like the two of us together, like as a team, if you will, can get so much more done. I mean, in a lot of ways, not just, from a work perspective or from, a family perspective, but it's like all of that can multiply, if you will, in a lot of ways. Like certain things that with the kids, if like she's not a big fan of, doing this or that, I'm like, no. I like, there's certain things that I enjoy. And I know it is one of those that threw me for a little bit of a mind loop, but like playing dolls with, my youngest daughter, she's huge into, or she was huge into like wanting to play pretend and wanting to play with dolls. And I'm like, it was a little bit of like, wait, is this manly? Like, is this so like, then I'm like, no, you know what? I'm taking care of her. This is what she enjoys doing. And I'm like, and she gets so happy. I'm like seeing her happy. I'm like, I don't care, man. I'll get down on the floor and play Barbies with you, bud. Like, where you're
no,
not,
I don't play pretend. I have a really hard time playing pretend. So
it's such a beautiful description you've given, and your flavor of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah.
It's magnificent. Okay. So this is like a new question, but I also want to connect the dots. How do you account for, you've been married for 13 years, together for 17. Do I have those numbers right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the way that you just, without question, are clear, like, oh yeah, sexual chemistry, we've always had that. That's never been a thing.
Yeah.
How is that the case?
So what's fascinating is that I'm going to try not to cry during this story, but if it happens, it happens. So I was, I'm just going to put a trigger warning here about sexual assault too. I was sexually assaulted about 6 weeks before I met him, and by an ex-boyfriend, and was in not the most amazing space. Like if I had to label the subconscious thoughts that were happening, it was like, okay, well, men really only want me for sex. So like, if that's the case, I'm going to have as much fun doing it as possible. Right. So when I met him, I was like, okay, this is like probably a one night stand or whatever. That's great. He's cute. Well, let's have some fun. And then the next day he was like, I want to see you again. And I was like, what? Okay, like, let's hang out. And then the day after that, he asked me to be his girlfriend. And which was honestly, you can tell that part of the story, but very uncharacteristic for him as well. But the thing from the beginning is, so a few weeks later, we were in his dorm room and his friends were hanging out and we were all just kind of goofing off. And he said something sarcastic. And I kind of just like tapped him and went to walk away, and he grabbed me. And like, not in a violent way, just like in a kind of a playful way. And I turned around and I hit him in the face, and which was a total trauma response to what had happened to me recently.
Yes.
And I was so embarrassed, and I went running out of the room, and he came running after me and like kind of stopped like 5 feet away, was like very respectful of the boundary and was like, hey, can I like come in? Right. And came closer, and he was like, what was that? In this very gentle way. And my body knew, like right then, I was like, this guy's safe. And so I still had a lot of trauma work to do, a lot of healing to do on my own. And, there was a lot of sexual repression after that for a while. And plus, I'm sure probably a lot of your listeners had this experience of, having premarital sex being very wrong and then being expected the day after marriage to just like flip into
it's like
mode.
The alchemical wedding ceremony where you have no libido, no lascivious desire, and suddenly you are fully expressed with your spouse.
Yes. So there was some of that religious trauma there too. But I think honestly, he has always given me space. Like even in the times that he's like, I want more, or like, oh, you said that you were going to do this and now you're not, he has always given me space for that. And I think that has made it so much easier to explore and to drop into my body and to find pleasure and to get just way more expressed sexually. And that's been really, really, it's been really powerful for me. Like he's so intent. Like he's like the level of attention and attunement to like what I need in the moment is beyond. And I've this is a very silly joke, but I've joked. I'm like, I wish that like other women could experience you. Like, I don't want them to actually experience you, but like, I wish that other women could experience you, because I think you would fundamentally change what their expectations are for how they are supposed to be treated in a sensual and sexual manner. So there you go. That's give you that little public compliment.
Yeah. No, I will say too, it is one of those, like she had kind of alluded to, like before I met her, it was one of those, player or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, as a, for instance, I know when we started dating, a bunch of my friends and people on my floor, I guess, had taken a bet out, if you will, as to how long we would be together.
But I think I should have won the money. I should have won the money.
Still should have gotten the kitty. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because in some ways, like when I met her, like within I'm like, it was somewhat of a lightning bolt moment, and then I was like, whoa, incredible! Like, okay, wait, like. And
say
I don't
more
even
about that. Will you get more specific? Like what in Lee you experienced, what in yourself you experienced that just changed the trajectory of your social life?
Yeah. It was so interesting because when I met her, it was, one thing I will say, it's kind of funny. I had told my mom and friends and stuff like that. I joked. I said, what I want to find is a beautiful redheaded woman who can, I think at the time I said, play the violin. And I joked with her. I was like, well, you used to be able to play the cello. But it was almost like something I really noticed, like within her. I will say, like the power, like even at the time, like there was this, not forceful, but like you were in some ways very driven. You knew, like, it felt like, at least, like you knew kind of what you wanted.
Yeah.
You were open to be like, you were so honest about things too. And in a lot of ways, I felt like so many people, when you would meet them and whatever else, it was like all just, pleasantries and like, oh, don't say too much, or don't, push, don't do anything like that. And just recognizing like, wow, actually willing to be honest. And even in that situation where when I came up to you and I'm like recognizing like, okay, something's up, but like, when you talk to me and you let me know, like, this is what happened, this is what's going on, it really helped me to go, okay, this isn't something I did wrong. Like, this isn't something that I'm being like, I think the worry I always had is like, I'm going to be that jerk, that the stereotypical, like, super, meathead kind of guy. I used to play football and was really into, sports and stuff. And I'm like, I want to be that like jerk of a guy. And just you being able to actually open up and going, oh, okay, that's amazing that you can, we've only known each other for how long? Yeah. And you can actually tell me like things that are important, things that are real. Like I love having conversations too about, bigger things. It's the joke, never talk about, sex, politics, and religion. I'm like, no, like those are the moments where the interesting things are, like where stuff gets activated and you never would necessarily like back down. And I don't mean like in like, but like, when I would talk to you about things, you weren't afraid to give me your opinion on things. Mm-hmm. You weren't afraid to say like, no, I actually disagree with you on that. And I was like, oh, and then you don't run away and you don't then hate me then afterward because we had a disagreement. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. 'Cause especially at that time, I'm politically quite different, religiously.
We were different,
pretty different. And two, just like, as we, kept our relationship growing and just realizing more and more. I mean, it's so funny. At first, we didn't have any fights or anything until I did a silly thing, but
he started the fight to see how we would fight because we hadn't fought yet.
Yeah. 'Cause I'm like, I really like her, but I don't want to have, I don't want to be with this girl for like years. And then we finally have our first big fight and realize, oh no, like, I invested all this time and energy, and it's probably not the smartest thing to do.
I think it's so funny too that you did that, because now looking back at your attachment history and your boundaries and your family growing up, I'm like, no wonder he wanted to know what a fight with me looked like, because that was probably really, really important. But at the time I was like, this is the weirdest thing anybody's ever done. Like to start a fight over something random, get all riled up and leave, and then come back and be like, I just wanted to see what this felt like. I'm like, okay.
You know that this wasn't going to be, you weren't going to be like
it one of those. It set the tone for experimentation as well. So,
yes.
All right. You're like within this story sharing so many profound, valuable learnings about being true to yourself, honesty, all these boundaries, all of it. But that was 17 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of people feel pretty awesome when the relationship starts. I mean, the way you're talking, is this your accounting for why you've had pretty impressive ongoing sexual chemistry your whole relationship? Or is there any more you would add? Like, how does the lush, mysterious, frank, courageous, sexy communications in the first week of knowing one another, how does that influence, you've been together 12 years, 15 years. There's a way in which it does, given your answer, but anything you want to flesh out for someone listening?
I think one of the big things too is, as we were together after we were married, we stopped having sex for 6 months before we were married because, partly from a priest that we had met. And when
I think it was 9 months.
Was it?
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it was a while.
It was a long time is what it was.
And two, once we were married, it was one of those, sex in general was always hot, but I did have other thoughts and ideas or things that I would want to try or this or that. And recognizing, even if it was something like, oh, I'm not necessarily feeling that, and again, things change and everything like that. But it was one of those, never did you make me feel bad or I was some kind of a terrible person. I think maybe at first I would have been maybe slightly worried, oh, it's just going to freak her out. And if nothing else, you were very good at being able to be no, I'm not really feeling that. But also, it's okay. It felt okay for me to have those thoughts.
Yeah. I think one of the other really big things for us that we did kind of struggle with at first is I am a pretty dominant human. And that comes from a lot of my own trauma responses and upbringing. And so there was a point at which I think we kind of confused masculinity and femininity with dominance and submission. And so one of the sticky areas of our marriage was that I was always trying to give him more control, but then I would be really controlling about it. And he's like, that's not how this works. Right. And so we actually we got introduced to, more kink play, and started playing with dominance and submission. And the person that we were learning from was you realize that masculinity and femininity and dominance and submission and for, who's in charge. Because what's fascinating is just because you're in the dominant role or submissive role doesn't mean that you're the top or the bottom. There's so much intersectionality between those three things. But that was the discovery, is I can be in my dominance in everyday life and be in my submission in the bedroom 80% of the time. And then 20% of the time be hey, can I can I be the dominant one? You know, we started being able to play with that. And that's actually been really, really powerful, because I know for me, submissiveness didn't feel safe for a while. Like being with him felt safe, but the submissiveness, the true submissiveness piece was hard. And so as we worked on that, that really brought a new level of intimacy and just hotness to the relationship. And then also for him to really be able to step into his dominance, because I had emasculated him and had been kind of dominating at the beginning. That I think, and you can speak to that, but I think that that really changed things for you. And also just, you know, the willingness to just try stuff like that, I think is something that we've always had there, kind of what he spoke to, and the willingness for us to just be like, hey, there's this thing that kind of sounds hot. Like, would you be down for that? And what usually happens is he's the one that's like, hey, there's this thing that sounds kind of hot. Would you be down for that? And I'm like, no. And then like 2 weeks later, I'm like, you know, that thing you brought up, like, can we actually, like, he knows, he's just got to like put the idea there and give me some time to create some safety around it. And then we're probably going to be good to go. So I think that just that willingness to have the conversations, I think most people don't talk about sex.
Yes, which is one of the positive predictive variables for a sexy, long-lasting, happy marriage is being able to talk about your sex life. So I've been thinking that while you're talking, like the acquired ease with communicating about it is one of the really big contributors.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say too, for me, it was a really big, this, I don't know, like mind fuck. I can't think of a better term. Like, because in my head, I had it as, you know, if I'm the man and I'm masculine, like a lot of times you should be more in control, and like that being the idea, but also recognizing like the person that I want to be. I'm like, I don't want to be this mean, like I would always see that you know, like for lack of a better term, like my grandpa Ron is somebody who I would see as like, he did exactly what he wanted all the time. And really he was an asshole. I mean, I didn't like the man. Right.
Masculinity and disconnection, they marry easily.
Oh, yeah. And I really thought like, okay, I don't want to be him. I don't want to be that guy. So being in some ways more dominant at first, especially, seems scary, because I'm like, well, also, you know, I like both, but I almost didn't let myself think like maybe I would like to be more dominant, because I'm like, oh, somewhere in my past, like there was somewhere that felt scarier, that felt dangerous in some way, that I'm going to become this like mean guy. And really it wasn't until, you know, like when you were more dominant and I was like, oh, that's really good. And then also I would have ideas like, wow, you know, that would be really good, but that's more me being dominant. So like, I don't know that I'd want to do that. I don't know if that's okay. And when you really brought up, you were like, we learned, you know, like, oh, masculine doesn't, and dominance is not one and the same. And I was like, wait, what? Like in my head, I guess I unknowingly had always paired those together, you know, and it really caused a lot of like distortion or like within me, or disharmony, like of this idea of like, oh, this might be something I want, but also like, is that okay? Is that wrong? Is that, you know, and I would get all into my head and keep running stuff over and over. And just realizing like, oh no, it can actually be fun. And it is something that you actually enjoy. Like I remember you saying that. And I'm like, wait, you would actually enjoy that? Like,
yes,
and you're like,
I would.
Yes. And I'm like, oh, wait, you wouldn't see it as me being, you know, the bad guy, if you will, or me being like this super controlling person, like being controlling, you know, like in day-to-day life. Like I didn't want to be that person who's like, no, you can't go out with your friends, or, you know, oh, you know, and like we've heard people talk like, oh yeah, you need to have GPS on your phone so I can know where you're at all the time. And I'm like, dude, that's not a good guy. And I never saw that as being like a good husband or, you know, a good parent. And like, but once I kind of realized like, oh no, wait, that's enjoyable for you too.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that's okay. Then I could actually like step more into that role, realizing it's not going to cause hurt or harm.
No, it caused hotness is what it caused. Because, you know, he's in the taking this to the business side, I'm in the front running role as the leader, and he's in well, I actually brag that he has come forward and is teaching some of our courses now, which I freaking love. He's such a good teacher, but he really does a lot of the structural provision. So if people are late on their payments, or if their cards fail, or if they he's I joke he's kind of our like bodyguard, because he's the one that lets me go and teach and do all the things and not have to worry about anything that could potentially hurt or harm the business. Like I know that he's got that. And so that, I think over the last several years, we've just really created this nice blend of, and it feels way more fluid, like where the times that it makes sense for me, or it feels best for me to be in submission, really it feels best for him to be in his dominance, and like vice versa. And that's been, kind of realizing that we can both be switches, both in and out of the bedroom, which honestly, I think is really all marriages. The idea that you're one or the other all the time is like this huge fallacy. That has, I think, kept the polarity and also just the heat really elevated.
Okay. I have about 45 questions, and I also am going to ask my final questions, but I just want to say this is such a rich conversation. It's one that is not really being had in homes across the country or the world. And so anyone listening, I'm definitely going to have Lee Cordell and Lee Cordell back for another conversation. So if you have particular questions after hearing this conversation, send them to me and I'll definitely file them and bring them out in our next conversation. I'm going to presume you'll say yes.
Yes.
And every interview, I ask the same question, because from my work and my lived experience and the way that I facilitate with couples, I'm clear that relationships are the ultimate vehicle for personal growth. I think there's a lot in what you're sharing, which certainly illustrates that. But I really love to ask this question that I'll ask you first. What is it that you've learned about yourself as a result of being married to Lee?
I think I'm not somebody who chokes up a lot. This has happened multiple times.
Although you've masked it very well, I don't know that people would have perceived it. So it's okay to let it be felt.
Yes, I'll let you know the emotion is there as I say the thing. That power that he talked about at the beginning, that is something that I've always felt was there, that up until a very specific point in my life was characterized as too much.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent a really long time trying to pretend that power didn't exist. And I think through our marriage, that theme of safety like runs through here too, is every time I have let that power out and felt like it was going to be too much, he has always met me with, what else you got? I want more. And I think that I really learned about myself that it is safe to be that human, because even if everyone else on the planet doesn't like it, like I've got somebody in my corner who's like, yes, be you and express that. And honestly, I think that is why our business is as good as it is and things are as good as they are, is because he's provided that safety for me to like really let that come forth.
Beautiful. And what have you learned about yourself?
I will say too, one of the big things I learned is, and it sounds maybe like, you should know this maybe when you're in elementary school, but that it is okay to be yourself. One of the things, especially in our relationship, I had so many preconceived ideas of like what I was supposed to be, who I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to like, what was societally okay. And in a lot of ways, realizing like that I didn't necessarily fit into this perfect little box, that there wasn't, this is, I would always be, this is what a man's supposed to be. This is what a husband's supposed to be, this and that. And having her being able to be like understanding if I would do something that was not like, in that box, and having it not be like, you getting all upset and you having like, all these things, and like recognizing like, oh, wait, I can actually be myself here. Like I can really share, because really before I met her, I would kind of have more of the issue. I would let some people know parts of me. Like I would joke, if you got everybody who ever knew me together in a room and they all said what they knew about me, maybe together they would have a pretty accurate picture of me. But my thought was I always felt like there were parts that I should hide of myself, or there were parts that just weren't okay. And really now, like recognizing like, no, it's okay to be me. Not only is it okay to be me, like it's good, and I think that's been one of the biggest like positive influences for me. Like even like with history, people like, why, what kind of job are you going to get with an ancient history degree? And like being able to have her here and supporting me and like, okay, let's find that. Let's find what lights you up, and being like, wait, that's possible. Like nobody I knew had a job that they enjoyed. Everybody just did, the standard 9 to 5, and recognize enjoyment and happiness can come from a lot of different places. It doesn't have to be this preconceived box that I had to fit into.
Wow, so beautiful. So some of my 45 questions have to do with how you work together, what you teach people, and how we even recognize that we have trauma. So we're not going to go into any of that, except to ask you to share, how do you help people? Tell us about the Institute with an eye to somebody listening who might like to pursue more. And of course, all your contact information will be in the show notes.
Sure. For me, I started the Institute, I think I said this, is as someone who had so much shame and so much guilt and so much just rules and restrictions on myself because of past painful experiences that had happened. I really, and learning that that's not how it had to be. And in fact, I say this quote to our participants a lot. I'm like, look, y'all, if shame worked to change you, you would have changed by now, right? So maybe we find a new vehicle. So what we really do, and we do it in a lot of different contexts. We have courses on parenting, and we just did a course together on romantic relationships. We have certificate programs for people who really want to understand the foundations of trauma and how it affects them both internally and externally in their world. Throughout all of that, what we are doing is helping people understand how their past painful experiences are showing up and affecting them in the present, and how to reframe them so that they can create futures that they really, really want. So that's whether it's in a couple weeks course or it's a 2-year long adventure we take together, people get to dive in at the level that feels best for them, whether that's a toe dip or it's like a full on, deep dive to the bottom of the ocean. So
one just super quick thing to add, I feel like is as big as, at least especially for me, when I first heard you say trauma, my head being historical background, I mean, I'm thinking World War I shell shock, I'm thinking trauma, huge trauma, like, and I'm thinking, okay, well, that makes sense. But like, I don't have any trauma. I don't have this, and realizing there's a difference between, huge stressors like that, but there's smaller trauma, what you call, little T trauma. So it's like everybody has generally some smaller traumatic events that have caused changes. Yeah. And I will say that was one of those big importance. Like some people, I don't know if in terms of people listening are going like, well, I wasn't involved in a mass shooting. There wasn't an attack or something. Recognizing, no, that's not necessarily, yes, that too, but also there are littler things that will happen in somebody's life that really do cause a lot of changes, and being able to understand that and understand how those affect your life, how you are showing up, how you want to be, where you want to go. I felt like that's, that made a big change to me because I'm like, I definitely didn't understand that before you started doing this work.
Yeah. I find that the people who tell us that they don't need our work are the ones that oftentimes need it the most because they don't even know that there's been things that have happened. And so that's always a fun experience. Whenever I hear somebody say, I've never had any trauma, I'm like, oh yes. Okay. I'm like honoring that experience for you. And also there might be some reframes in here that could be helpful because it is helpful when you know that any experience that's caused you to cut off a piece or part of yourself, that's trauma. And so, if you feel like you can't live as your fully expressed self, then that is something that we can really help with, and helping you help other people do that too.
Fabulous. Any last words for listeners who are on the edge of their seats the way I am? Well, I'm actually standing, but it's just so glorious to hear the two of you speak. Any final words?
No, I mean, just if anybody has any questions, I love questions. Questions are this is why I love being a podcast guest. Cause I'm like, ask me all the questions and just let me talk. Like he'll tell you, that's my favorite thing. So if anyone has any questions, we would absolutely love for them to reach out. And whether it's about our marriage or about marriage in general or the Institute itself, we'd be glad to connect. So,
and also too, I'm willing to answer any questions as well. So if there's any guys out there in terms of listening, like if they want to ask me anything, and I'm especially like email wise, like I'm pretty open. Like there's nothing is gonna offend me. Nothing is gonna like make me upset. Like I'm like, no, I love giving information.
Okay. Well, thank you both for your generosity. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, and please leave a rating and a review. And if you're ready to deepen your relationship and create a truly intimate, delicious, and vibrant marriage, head over to the Work With Me page at alexandrastockwell.com and choose the program that's right for you.